A is for Archive, The World of Warhol from A to Z, by Matt Wrbican, is a triumph on so many fronts. And this night is not just any old book debut, because in some miraculous way, we defeated time, and Matt was able to see his book before his passing. A is an Archive is an anthology of writings by Matt Wrbican, the museum's longest-serving archivist and Warhol scholar. He was an unequaled authority on Warhol, and his love for his work knew no bounds. Matt was one of the first employees of the Andy Warhol Museum before it had a building to speak of. His museum career spanned over a quarter century, and he never wanted to quit. When Matt became ill in 2015 and needed to leave the museum for treatment, he asked me if I would try to find a way to publish some of his unpublished writings from the past 2 decades. Now, if you've ever studied Andy Warhol, you know that he was an inveterate collector of things, ideas, people, and processes. Going through his archive is an endless scavenger hunt. For 2 decades, Matt curated more than 40 exhibitions from within the archive, some large, some small. Each exhibition was a scholarly endeavor. Matt's research into unique subjects, objects, and theories about Warhol was deep. I tried to think about Matt's writing as units in a curriculum, and then in a moment of inspiration, I thought of Warhol's alphabet books from the 1950s. What if Matt's work became an alphabet book? I ran with the idea. I assigned various exhibition texts to letters of the alphabet, and I took it to Matt for approval. He liked it, but of course, had suggestions for changes and ideas for missing chapters. But I knew this was good material. The majority of it was unpublished, and it was a portrait of Warhol that no one else could create. When Yale made the offer, I jumped on it. I texted Matt, and he was over the moon. With a Yale imprint, and with the generous support of Lee Simons through the Juliet Lee Hillman Simons Foundation, the game was on. While editing the book, I had to make some very difficult cuts. When the manuscript and images were sent off to Yale, it was originally going to be 300 pages and 160 illustrations. But more is more with Warhol and with Wrbican. At one point during one of our initial kickoff meetings on the phone with Yale and with the designer, it was discussed that none of us had ever worked on such a unique book, that it was unprecedented in scope and content. And now, I give to you Aaron Byrne, archivist, who has presented Warhol's work in time capsules around the world, and Blake Gopnik, art critic and author of the upcoming definitive biography of Andy Warhol to be published next spring by HarperCollins. These two know more about Warhol than anyone should. And we're privileged to work with Matt Wrbican for so many years. So ladies and gentlemen, let's give these two, the book, and Matt Wrbican a joyous round of applause.
We should say that we know a fair amount about Andy Warhol, but no one will ever know as much about Andy Warhol as Matt Wrbican knew. It was a pleasure, a joy working with him. So I can't be happier than to be here. And Aaron has tried, at least. I can't say you filled his shoes, because they were large shoes, probably literally and figuratively.
I tried to fill his Hawaiian shirts more, yes.
But Aaron knows vastly more than I do about Andy Warhol. So if you want to know about time capsules, I'm afraid you'll have to go to her, luckily for me.
Yes, so they've all been opened at this point, and we've counted over 300,000 individual objects within the time capsules alone, but they're only part of the archive, which brings us to our second letter, where I'm always looking in the
C. C is after B. That much we can promise you. Even in Warhol land, C is after B. And can we see that? Oh, there's our camera. This may be hard to read, impossible, I'm sure, for people over there, but it is a veterinarian's report, or bill actually, for the treatment of a Siamese feline, male, 20 years old, named Sam. The story goes that Andy Warhol had 25 cats named Sam, and the reason the story goes that way is because, we need some trumpets up here, he published a book called 25 Cats Named Sam. Notice that the spelling error. It's not named, it's name. But in my extensive research, luckily I have a PhD in art history, which lets me know that, in fact, he didn't have 25 cats named Sam. That's just the name of the book. Matt and I spent way too much time, like infinitely too much time, figuring out how many cats he really did have. And you can actually, because of this archive, trace how many cats he had almost year by year. So you can watch the number go up and then down. But I love the fact that it looks like the first Sam actually survived was the last cat. This is the kind of thing you discover in the archive. You just discover these amazing documents that give you insight into Andy, if not as an artist, at least as a cat lover.
So Warhol eventually abandons cats, and he moves on to dogs. So in 1973, Warhol's then boyfriend at the time, Jed Johnson, convinced Warhol to get a dog, and they decided to get a Dachshund. Archie then became Warhol's companion. He would take him everywhere, to restaurants, on planes when he would travel. And we have a lot of little objects related to him.
Shall I tell the story of how Archie came to be known as Archie?
Yeah.
Which she doesn't know.
Blake
She's
has
never
been holding
heard this
out
story.
on me. So I've always heard that Archie was named after Archie Bunker, the television character.
Which is what he told the press, because Warhol,
Dupes like me.
Warhol always lied to the press. One of the things that happens when you're researching Warhol is weird things, weird stories come to you out of the blue. I'm talking to a source about something completely different, and he says to me, "You know why Archie was named Archie, right, Mr. Biographer?" And of course I said, "Yeah, but just tell me again, just remind me of why." And he says, "Well, there was a hustler in Union Square in front of Warhol's studio whose name was Archie." And how am I going to say this politely? This is
PG.
yeah. Archie was known for the size of his member. And this is the reason why...
You landed it.
This is the reason why Archie the dog, the dachshund, the sausage dog, was named Archie. I apologize for that anecdote, but sometimes you just have to tell it the way it is.
So we have a lot of items that illustrate just how much, Andy had loved his dogs. One of the favorite things that a lot of the archive staff working on this book were these dog sweaters, which you can see are very funny when they're not actually on a mannequin. I know Kristen and Brianna and Becky had a really difficult time because they kind of just look like these little flat things, which allowed us to get a wonderful dog mannequin for the collection. So we have all of the original collars, as well as the rabies tags, and you can even see when they were registering the dog licenses for both Amos and Archie.
So we have finished with dogs and cats, and we're moving on to the most important, I think, chapter in here, and it's D is for Duchamp, because I think the most important thing that Matt ever did as a curator or archivist was explore the relationship between Andy Warhol and Marcel Duchamp. I was just thinking about this today. I'd never really thought it through completely, but Marcel Duchamp has been voted, I don't know how these things happen, but it was voted most influential artist of the 20th century. And something occurred to me that Warhol is by far his most dedicated pupil, that Warhol is the most Duchampian artist that one could almost think of. So for Matt to have dug so deep into this relationship, this object, which is a catalog come newspaper of the show, is actually a really important object. It's called Twisted Pair, because they were a twisted pair. This is one of the most important things that Matt ever did, because it really digs into this relationship in all I can call absurd detail. Matt, like Aaron, and probably like me, has a certain obsessive-compulsive personality, and he really went into detail here. The other thing about Warhol that he goes into is that Warhol collected a lot more avant-garde art than people know about. They always think of him as a collector of cookie jars, but he collected art very seriously, and he had considerable collection of Marcel Duchamp objects, which he started in the early 60s. Probably 62, he bought a major Duchamp piece and continued to buy and trade for Duchamps. He had a urinal. He had one of Marcel Duchamp's famous urinal fountains, and he had one. And we have the receipts for it, various bits and pieces.
I mean, these things are really important for us, especially when people are seeing the archive. A lot of the first thing that always comes to their mind is the word hoarder, which I never try to disavow. It's not untrue. But I always try to point out that his hoarding was much different, and I would much rather live in his hoarding in the sense that he was collecting Duchamps and Piaget watches and jewelry and all of these different things. He had a great eye, and he was brought up with the de Menils were teaching him how to collect Art Deco before it was even famous. So tracking these types of things really shows what an amazing collection he had, even though he was also collecting cookies and candies and bugs for us. These receipts that we have there from Macy's are one of these great little nuggets from the book where
so
we have...
Macy's sold Marcel Duchamp art. This is how department stores have changed. Well, they don't even exist anymore, but even when they existed in their heyday, they sold Marcel Duchamp art, which is kind of amazing.
And I mean, even just that seemed unbelievable, and we were having a very hard time, and by we I mean Brianna, of locating these things, because it was one of the things that Matt had seen so long ago, and he was able to reference it so readily, but it took a lot of divining rods in the archives until we were actually able to find out that he actually did buy them from Macy's. Matt was never wrong.
Matt would tell me, the biographer, oh, I know that there's, a receipt for his second camera in the archive, and then I'd have to go to her and say, I want to see the receipt for his second camera, and there was no way.
I'd ask Brianna. Yeah.
And then eventually the thing would appear.